Did a UFO really crash into Connecticut's Bantam Lake? Many of the residents from Bantam say yes, they saw something green and fiery fall into the lake. And even some of my viewers have commented from some previous videos to say they were there and they saw it. And I'm going to be talking about their experiences tonight and what they saw, as well as other UFO sightings in the Bantam area. So stick around. I'm going to be talking about some cool UFO sightings in Connecticut, Bantam area.
Ghosts around you everywhere. Wait until you meet the man. In my dreams, I see your path. He glanced at me and then faded back.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And I've just gotten back from another trip to Bantam Lake up in Litchfield, Connecticut, and was up there for a few things. First of all, we went to the Robin Hood's Medieval Fair, which is a Renaissance fair up in Harwinton, Connecticut, which is just about 20 minutes outside of Bantam. We did 2 days there. It was really awesome. It's a smaller fair, but some really good acts there, and we just love going to the Renaissance fairs and hanging out. So a lot of fun there. And while we were there, we ran into and met up with my friend Sean and his wife Grace, and we all went out to dinner. Sean, I did an episode for Sean a few weeks ago about UFO sightings in Connecticut, in Torrington and Harwinton. So we've been following each other on Instagram for a long time, and because I'm not in Harwinton, it's hard for us to meet. So I was up there and we went out for dinner. We had some awesome conversation. Just wish we could have hung out longer. You know, it was just a long day for us, and darkness comes and it's time to go to bed. So, but we did hang out for a while. But I love the Bantam area. Bantam Lake is just so cool. And there's a lot of UFO sightings up there. And I've discussed this on the show many times before. I've had episodes about the Bantam Lake UFO crash, and John and I did an episode on high strangeness at Bantam Lake, and I've done little spin-off episodes about searching the lake for the UFO. Not that I was expecting to find anything, but me, my dad, and my son went out there and we looked. So yeah, this week I wanted to cover that again because I've had many viewers since I posted those episodes talking to me about how they were there. These are people from Bantam, around Bantam, Morris County, who witnessed this green object hovering, shooting across the sky, and even falling into Bantam Lake. So was it a UFO? Was it a meteor? We'll get into that. But I did want to cover some other UFO sightings from around that area because I just spent the weekend there and I love Bantam Lake. And so we will do that. And yeah, just Sean, Grace, thank you guys for watching. It was awesome meeting you. And let us get into some UFO sightings right now. Okay, so once again, I'm using New Fork, the National UFO Reporting Center, their database for all these UFO sightings tonight. And right up here is Bantam. This is Bantam Lake, this little peninsula here dangling from the top. This is where we camped. We camped on the east side, looking east. And but there are some sightings from here. The UFO, I'm hearing different things about where in Bantam Lake it crashed. But we'll get into that when I get to that story. But I do want to cover some of the stories from Bantam here, and right up here, this road. I mean, this is kind of where we go shopping, and just a very cool area. And we might get to one down here in Morris County as well. It's a short story, so I don't know if I'm going to cover it. But we will see how the episode goes. So let us move on to some UFO sightings in Bantam, Connecticut. All right, so this first sighting happened on July 4th of 2014. So we're going back a little bit. Bantam, Connecticut. Lights on an object, left a trail, and changed color. So a little bit odd. And this witness says they saw two moving lights floating around in the yard, slowly moved back and were flashing like a strobe. Also a cluster of lights in the trees above. So these almost sound more like those orbs that people see closer to the ground, and they're smaller. They're not the typical large, saucer shape or triangle shape craft. These are like smaller lights. And I've talked about these on the show before. I've never really done a full episode on them, but in various UFO episodes, I have discussed these orbs that people see. So let's get to the narrative here where it says, there were two moving lights floating around in my yard, slowly moved by the window, then moved back and were flashing opposite me, like they took a picture. Also, up in the trees, I saw a cluster of glowing strobe-like flashing and then twinkling lights getting brighter, then dimming, changing colors with no sound. At first, I thought they were fireworks, this 4th of July, but they were not fireworks. They stayed in the exact spot for an hour. This is not the first time I've seen these. A few days ago, I saw two fireballs behind my house. I looked out the window and I noticed lights in the woods. They quickly came into view above the trees at a very high speed, leaving a contrail like a comet. Then they appeared to play and move around in the backyard. And I noticed at the same time there was this cluster in the trees in a similar spot and height as last night. The small balls of light also came by the window and flashed. It seemed as though they were watching and observing me. Then they just disappeared, orbs and cluster in the trees. So a very strange story. Like I said, this does sound like the orbs that people have told me about, and I do hope to do an episode on that at some point. I've seen these things. I know people who've seen these things, and it's very similar behavior. That these orbs are low to the ground. They're usually like grapefruit size, basketball size. They're not large craft that we think of when we think of UFOs, but the flashing, the going to different windows, almost like they were looking in the windows. Just very strange, and I've heard that before. So anytime I hear these stories, it makes me wonder why they go into the windows. It's almost like they're peeking, they're looking at us. Very strange. Some of these, he's saying they left a contrail like a comet. The skies out there can be pretty clear. I'll throw some pictures up that I took this past weekend, and you can see the stars. You can see trails of like planes that were going by as I was taking the long exposure photos to get the stars. So a cool sighting. I think, we can separate some of the comet type stuff from the orb stuff. The orb stuff is really interesting. But again, I've heard this up in the trees, going to the windows, moving around the backyard. Weird, very weird. And I don't know what to make of them. Are they probes? Are they? And again, if aliens wanted to spy on us discreetly, why are these things lit up so brightly where people can see them? Just very strange, but happened in Bantam. So wanted to throw that out there. And let me know what you guys think of these orbs. Again, not the traditional flying saucer or triangle or cigar-shaped craft that we typically hear about. Just very strange orbs in the woods behind this guy's house. So let me know what you guys think of this one. Okay, so this next story took place in the summer of 1975. So we're going back a long time. One observer, they say it was a circle. Animals reacted, which again, we hear in a lot of these stories where animals, people may have a dog or a cat, or they have chickens out back, and the animals react. So it's unusual because, a plane goes overhead, a helicopter goes overhead. The animals usually don't react. So what's changing their behavior? So I'm just going to pull up a map of Bantam Lake here. And this is the area we're going to be talking about, Brunetto Grove, which is these houses down here. We camped here on Point Folly, like I said, on the east side. So we were about mid-peninsula here. And our campsite looks out towards the west, like towards Marsh Point here, Kilbourne Cove. You have Keeler Cove. And I've heard different things about where the green UFO crashed. And we'll get to that. But just so you guys kind of see what I'm talking about here. But this report is coming from down here, Brunetto Cove, and these houses. So let me get to the story. So it's a circular object with white around it and yellow in the middle. And they say, I lived on Bantam Lake, and I was down at the Brunetto Grove beach area with one of the neighborhood dogs named Rusty. All of a sudden, this circular object showed up. It was hovering over the water about 6 feet from me. The size was 4 feet by 4 feet. So again, you're talking a small object. This is not a large UFO craft. It's more like a little orb or probe. The dog saw it because he was barking at it. The outside of color was white and the inside of it was yellow. So very interesting. And I've heard this again with the orbs, that they're an amber color, an orange color, a yellow color. That's mostly what I've heard. I've heard red, I've heard white, but this orangish amber range is what I hear a lot. So interesting that it was yellow. They say, I started talking to it saying, hi, who are you? And it said nothing, just continued to hover. Then it started to bounce over the water, went up over the trees by Point Folly and zipped out of sight. So Point Folly is where I camp. So it went, sort of northeast up to Point Folly. but he's kind of talking to it, and again, I can see that. Like you see something that's like really weird, and you're like, oh, hello, how are you today? Weird floating orb object from possibly another planet or dimension. Uh, just very strange, and the dog's barking at it, and this to me just it's funny, but it just rings so true and sincere that you see something like this and just be like, oh, hello, and hope it doesn't zap you or abduct you or whatever it's going to do. It started to bounce over the water, so I don't know if he means above the water or actually hitting the water and bouncing on the water. I'm going to say over the water, just that it kind of floated over the water, over the trees. And again, we hear this a lot with the orb stories, that it goes to the windows, but that it also then just for whatever reason goes back up into the trees, like the leaves are going to hide it when it's glowing bright yellow or orange or whatever. uh, and then it went over to Point Folly and zipped out of sight. So very strange. And they finish up by saying, I don't know what it was, as it didn't make any noise and it was just bouncing. I do know that a few days later, there was a sighting of a UFO in Connecticut. I know what I saw and I will never explain it. There's a note here that just says the witness indicates the date of the sighting is approximate. And I get that. You see something weird at, 1975, you're talking, 51 years ago. I get it, but he probably knows it was summer, late summer, August, sees this thing. Very strange. And again, I will link to my old episodes below, but John and I, we've seen some weird things at Point Folly. I don't know what they were. I call them UFOs, and I say this in all my episodes: unidentified, flying, and an object. That's all I'm implicating, that it was unidentified, it was flying because it was in the air, and it was an object of some sort. I'm not saying it was from another planet. I'm not saying it was from another dimension. It could be military, it could be whatever, but this is 1975. You don't have people flying drones. It's small. It's not, like I said, the large saucer craft that we think of when we think of UFOs. And, because sometimes people see these things, they say it was as big as a football field, or it was huge, it blocked out the stars. We hear about these really massive UFOs, but we also hear about these little orb or probe sort of craft. And I don't know what to make of it, but I hear it over and over again. And as I'm doing these episodes, I keep coming across it. And this is from 1975. So very bizarre, but I like it because it went over Point Folly, which is where I camp. So very, very strange. Okay, and this brings me again to the Bantam Lake UFO crash, if you want to call it that. And we're going to talk about this story, and there's the official explanation, and then I want to get into some of my audience comments, people who contacted me, because they add some details that you're not getting in the mainstream media. But this happened on April 10th of 2012. About 2 a.m. local time, give or take, Bantam, Connecticut. And they say this was a glowing whale-sized object falling from the sky into the Connecticut lake. It was initially seen by a motorist, and this is what made it into the papers. The following is an article published on 4/12 of 2012 on Fox News. A state trooper and a motorist reported a large object falling out of the sky in Litchfield, Connecticut. A green, glowing, whale-sized object that plunged into Litchfield Lake, which is Bantam Lake, not Litchfield Lake, so they got that wrong. It is a Litchfield Lake, but it's called Bantam Lake. State authorities said no go. They failed to locate anything mysterious. The Republican American of Waterbury reports that a person driving in Litchfield at about 2 a.m. Tuesday reported that an object the size of a whale fell from the sky and crashed into Bantam Lake. Officials say that at about the same time, a state trooper 10 miles away in Warren, which we go near when we go up there, he called dispatchers to report that something fell out of the sky and landed near Bantam or Morris. And Morris County kind of intersects with Bantam Lake. It's mostly in Bantam, but a little bit of it is actually in Morris County. Morris firefighters made several passes up and down the lake in a boat looking for a possible plane crash, but they didn't find any debris. Authorities called off the search, leaving the mystery unsolved. But science may have the answer. According to the National Weather Service, there was a meteor shower that morning. WTNH.com reported perhaps the whale-sized object was simply a meteor. And there's a link here to the story. I will post this down below. I did a blog post about this a long time ago. Like I said, I've done numerous episodes on this, so I don't want to really rehash this too much. But I did want to talk about my audience contacting me and saying they were there. And they add some detail to this. And interesting that a state trooper saw it too. So you have, law enforcement as well as just another motorist. So let me get into some of my viewers and what they saw, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so from one video, UFO crash at Bantam Lake. I will link to all these again below, but some users did comment here. So this one user JN6LK, you guys can go to the go to the video and read the comments. But they say people wouldn't mistake a UFO green size of a whale crashing into the lake. If a meteorite, it would have created a big impact. I know a few of the responders. So a cryptic message. But yeah, if something that big crashed into the lake, I mean, the lake is a big lake, but it's not like one of the Great Lakes. It's like the biggest lake in Connecticut. But if you look on a map, it's not a huge lake. If something fell into the lake, even something relatively small, you would have had much more damage, much more of an impact. People would have known. There are houses surrounding the lake, like on the lake, and we'll get into that. Another commenter, Robert Brown 5248 said, I have more information to add to this. I was in Torrington out at a baseball field with a clear view, and the next few days later with the ball field visible to Route 8 and possible retrieval. I would even submit to a polygraph. No joke. I know what we saw. Email me some questions and I'll give you a detailed factual report. And he comments on some other videos as well, so I'll get into that. He does provide some more detail later. Sauceman5616 says, I remember this quite well because I was sitting out by the campfire at my childhood home in Litchfield when I saw this object falling in the distance. So very interesting. There's more witness to this than just the two people. You have the motorist and the state trooper. But I've been contacted by other people who've seen this. So very interesting. So I did another episode calling Investigating the Bantam Lake UFO. And this wasn't a podcast episode. This was like me, my dad, and my son. We just went out on our rafts and we were paddling around where this object allegedly crashed or fell. So on this one, we have a comment from user BadTwin42, who talks about a weird experience on Bantam Lake, and I'll tell about that, but also what they saw. And she says, I was kayaking on that lake about 2 months ago or more, and all of a sudden the lake began to get extremely wavy as if boats just drove by, making the waves. But I was the only one on the lake, or at least that part. I didn't see or hear any motorized boats. I honestly thought it was an earthquake at first. Weird. But wouldn't be surprised if something weird military-wise was going on over there, as Camp Columbia was there as a military camp from 1906 to the 1980s. Also, me and my friends were driving in Watertown and saw the green light hover as if it was a helicopter for a minute or two. Then it shot down like a green streak of light. Only the next day we found out it crashed in Bantam Lake. So she has this weird experience on the lake, which I do want to talk about, because when there's no wind and there's no other boats on the lake, that water can be like glass. Very still, calm lake. If there's a lot of wind, and if you're kayaking, there's wind, because the wind will make kayaking either very difficult or very easy, depending on if it's coming at you or behind your back, because it could propel you forward, or it could just be this hindrance that you're paddling against. So interesting, but I like how she tries to sort of debunk it and say maybe it was an earthquake, maybe there was something else going on, but that it was weird that these waves came out of nowhere. And like I said, the lake is big, but it's not huge enough where if there's a motorboat, you're going to hear it, you're going to see it, and then you get the waves. And again, the waves don't really get big unless you're like right up against the shore. So really interesting. But the green UFO crash, I think, is interesting because she's seeing this green light hover, and there's going to be some more stories where they talk about it hovering. So it's not a meteor if it's hovering. Meteor is just going to fall. Gravity's pulling it. Its momentum is pulling it. And we hear this a lot with UFO stories where skeptics will say, oh, you saw Venus, you saw this, you saw... Those things don't stop and hover and change direction in midair. They're going so fast, they can't. They can maybe change direction a little bit once they bounce off the atmosphere, but they're not going to hover. They're not going to stop. They're not going to make a right, 90-degree turn. Very strange. But she's saying that this hovered like a helicopter for a minute or two, not just a couple of seconds, a minute or two. It's hovering and then shot down in a green streak. Doesn't sound like a meteorite to me. Very, very odd. Um, and again, at the time, they're just seeing it shoot down. They didn't know where it landed, where it went. And then the next day, they know it landed in Bantam Lake. So make of all this what you will. And this last bit of info comes to us from my video with John. I did with my buddy John, High Strangeness at Bantam Lake. And we talked about our personal experiences there. But I did mention the UFO crash in Bantam Lake. And user Das Ghost, who I don't know if it's the same user from before. It's a different name, but the story is very similar. So I'm going to read what they write here. And he says, I was a witness that did not come forward. I was in shock, to be honest, and no one would have believed me. I witnessed the whole thing from entry to recovery that night. We were sitting at the baseball/football field down the south end of Torrington the night that it came out of the sky. It did fall, but it fell straight over us in the field. It came down fast, really damn fast. It hovered for a second and then shot straight across the city like it was a tiny dot in the sky, looking up and then got brighter and brighter and so damn bright. I had to turn my head when I looked back. It literally shot across the sky. I would be willing to take a polygraph on it. And then he adds another comment where he continues, the next evening, we saw a large 18-wheeler flatbed surrounded by what looked like federal vehicles and a few SUVs, and the flatbed had federal vehicles up front and in the very back, and on all sides, they had blue flashing lights. Whatever was on that flatbed was cylindrical in shape and tarped. It looked like it was as big as what they say, not a sperm whale, but about 35 to 40 feet long, 10 feet wide, cylindrical object. It was heading towards Winstead, Connecticut, which is interesting because I've done an episode on the Winstead Wildman, which is an alleged Bigfoot sighting or series of sightings from like the late 1800s. So I will link to that episode down below too. A lot of high strangeness in Connecticut. And it was heading towards Winstead, Connecticut on Route 8, coming from the far south end of Torrington, like they came down from Litchfield, and that road goes all the way to Morris Bantam Lake area. So very interesting. And I mean, the story itself just sounds a little tropey, a little 1950s, UFO alien invasion movie where you have the feds and you have the big truck and there's this thing on a tarp. And you'd think that if they captured something like a UFO from another planet or another dimension, that they would try to conceal it better than just throwing a tarp over it on an 18-wheeler. But at the same time, people do see these things, and it makes you wonder. There was a similar thing with the Long Island UFO crash, and I will link to that below. I did an episode on that. But you have this thing that crashes, and the government is saying it's a meteor, it's space debris, it's nothing. But then they're carrying it out on a tarp, and there's lots of military vehicles or federal vehicles, and they're not letting people see what it was. And I let me talk about my thoughts about this. So do I think that what crashed in Bantam Lake was an actual UFO? Not really. One, like I said, the lake is not big enough for a craft to crash into it. Two, it's not remote enough where if something crashed and the military were there, people would have seen this that night, the next day. Like I said, there are houses all along the shoreline. There are campers there. I mean, this was April, so Point Folly, not open yet. Back then in April. I think even now they don't open until like the 1st of May. So there wouldn't have been campers there, but you would have had people who live along the lake seeing this activity. And apparently we do. We have some people seeing this activity. So I don't know if it was a crashed UFO. I think if this was something really dangerous like that, they would have cordoned off the area. They would have evacuated people. Do I think it was a meteor? That I also don't know about that either. If it was as big as people are saying, 35 to 40 feet long, 10 feet wide, I've heard people saying like a meteorite the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, which is much smaller than that. If that hit Earth, like we'd have a bad problem. That would create a big crater. So here you're talking about something much larger than a Volkswagen Beetle crashing into the lake. And, you might say, oh, the water maybe cushioned its crash. I mean, the water in Bantam Lake, especially in the area where they're saying it crashed, you're talking maybe 15 feet deep at its deepest. in that area. I mean, I think Bantam can go to like 40 feet deep in certain places, but it's not a very deep lake where this rock from space is going to crash, and it's not going to create huge waves or anything like that. I had other people. I couldn't find the comments. I wasn't sure if it was emails or it was comments on other videos. Uh, but there was one guy who said he lived on the lake and there were waves coming up that night. So he's saying something did crash because he was outside and there was water just washing up and very roughly the way he described it. Again, I wish I could find the comment. I can't now. I apologize. But that was the one last comment that I got from a viewer or listener who said, yeah, like there were waves coming up. Clearly something big fell in the lake, because even, I've seen really fast motorboats in that lake, and you get waves. They're not these big crashing waves that come up on shore like this guy was telling me. So really interesting. Possible space debris, of course, very possible. And if the feds got out there at night before sunrise and they retrieved this thing, I don't know how they would have gotten boats into the lake. It's not an easy lake to get into from Point Folly, which, again, this craft allegedly fell near Point Folly. So again, is it a UFO? By the strictest definition of the word, yes, or the anagram anyway. It's unidentified. It was flying and it was an object. But people saw this thing. They saw this thing hovering. They saw it change direction. They saw it fall into the lake. You have many more witnesses than the motorist and the state trooper. So I appreciate everybody for chiming in. Hopefully this video reaches even more people and more people can contact me. Again, you can email me. You can leave a comment on this video or on the audio versions. Leave a comment, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com, and very happy to speak to you and get more information. Don't know what to make of this one. This one has baffled me. I mean, clearly people have seen something. There's some weirdness surrounding it, but I can't imagine anything very large fell into the lake unless this thing disintegrated. It could have been the size of a whale when these people were seeing it, but it would have had to have been very small when it fell into the lake to not make a bigger dent, if you will. Something very large would have created a crater, maybe burned some trees. Waves from the lake would have really been noticeable. And apparently they were, but not like tsunami waves, and something that big would have caused some devastation. And there's no devastation there. We were there probably just a few months after this happened and no sign of anything. So not sure what to make of it, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's do one more story. Let's do the Morris County story. It's not as intriguing as the other ones. It's a little bit shorter, but it's right by Bantam Lake. And if Bantam Lake has UFOs, it might be one to just throw on the pile. So let's talk about that one last. Okay, so this last story, as I said, is from Morris County. It's just a little bit south of Bantam Lake, not by much, very, very close to Bantam Lake, but in Morris County. Like I said, Morris County overlaps a little bit into the Bantam Lake property. This happened on December 26th of 2024, so just a couple of years ago, and day after Christmas. So this was Morris County, Connecticut, in the backyard of a 7-acre farm. It was an orb. It was bright. Not sure of the size. It was seen from land. It was seen in the southwest, and closest distance was about 100 yards. A very short story here, so let me get to that and I'll give my thoughts. But like I said, I think it's good to just add these stories to the pile because we've seen some weird stuff at Bantam Lake, weird lights in the sky, and those are all included in the previous episodes, which again are linked below. But for this story, the witness says, I saw an orb traverse from the horizon to about 100 feet in the air about 8 p.m. I thought it might be a drone from a neighbor. As I mentioned at 8 o'clock, I saw what I thought was a drone from a neighboring house. However, I saw the same orb moving at around 3:30 a.m. This is when I videotaped what I saw. There's no video here. And as I mentioned in the past, New Fork, a lot of these stories will mention pictures or video, and it's not included. And I don't know if this is a function of the website, because some stories do have the video and the photos. So I don't know if someone has to manually approve that to be published. I don't know if the person just forgot to attach the file, or if the file was too large and didn't know how to compress it. So there's no video here, but he's seeing what he's describing again as an orb. There's no color here, but they're saying it was a bright light. It is quiet up there. It's not the city. I mean, there's civilization there. Clearly, there's people living there. There's homes. Uh, New Milford is pretty close as far as a bigger town goes. But at night, it is very, very quiet. If this was a drone, this guy would have heard it. And drones typically look like little helicopters, and you hear the propellers, zzz, they're buzzing. Uh, so weird. And then again, he's seeing it at 8:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. I'm sorry, 8 o'clock at night, and then again at 3:30 in the morning. Uh, Very strange, very strange. But again, the orb, and like I said in previous episodes, John and I have seen things. John saw some things in the sky that seemed to be like dancing with each other. We saw a red light one time that was just kind of hovering above the horizon for probably 40-45 minutes. We were just sitting on the lake at night on a rock, just talking, and this thing was, we thought it was a like a red tower beacon, so helicopters wouldn't crash into it. And then it zipped off and it went north, and just weird. Again, not a helicopter. We didn't hear any blades or propellers. No noise, no engine noise, nothing. So we've seen weird things. There was one time we were sitting at the campfire and we see these orange lights kind of floating over the campground, just one and then two and then a third one. And at first we were like, what the hell is that? It looked really weird. And then once they got a little closer, we could see that they were Chinese lanterns. So somebody must have launched these lanterns, and they're just really eerie looking. But as they got closer, you could see the flames flickering and you could see the structure around them. But at first, it was just these orange lights just kind of floating over Point Folly. And we thought they were UFOs, but they were just Chinese lanterns. So very, very strange stuff. All right, everybody. So please let me know what you think these things were. There's these orbs. I would love to hear your stories if you have orb stories. Because I've heard these from people I know and trust, and I've seen them myself, and I don't know what to make of them, but the stories are always very similar, like I said. So if you have an experience with these orbs, please let me know. If you're in Connecticut, if you've been on Bantam Lake, if you saw the green UFO crash into Bantam Lake, I would love to hear from you. So please shoot me an email, jason@oddanuntold.com, and would be happy to speak to you. You can come on the show. You could just share your story and I can share it on the show like I've shared these tonight. But Bantam Lake is a place that's really near and dear to my heart. I love going there. Been going there since I was a kid. And over the years, I've seen some strange things. Most of the time, nothing strange at all. But, we've had a few instances where I've seen, and others have seen strange things there. So I love investigating this stuff. I love to hear what people in Bantam, in and around Bantam, Litchfield, Torrington, Harwinton, if you've seen things up there, I want to hear from you. So, like I said, jason@oddanuntold.com, shoot me an email. And until next time, everybody, question everything. Like I'm questioning these stories. Were these drones? Was this space junk? Was this just a meteorite? Very possibly, but there's no one explanation that really covers it all, and that bothers me. That it yes, most likely was a space rock, but it does. There's things about it that don't really make sense. Space debris, same thing. Most likely Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Usually, that's the key word there. Not always. So we got to keep that in mind. So I don't know what to make of this. There's just more questions than answers. But I do love that people reached out to me to give me their feedback and their experience. So I would love to hear more. If you guys are out there and you hear this and watch this and want to talk to me about it, I'd love that. But yeah, stay weird, everybody. Embrace the weird. And until next time, I'll see you next week. Rock and roll, everybody. Keep watching the skies because God knows what's falling from them.